RTS, real-time strategy. This genre of games is about as oversaturated as shooters became after Call of Duty's success, and yet was still one of the only genres that survived the relentless march of time. With every year that passes, it seems like RTS games, no matter how old, busted, and janky they become, they still hold a loyal fan base that seems as feral as the average tier 3 Pokemon sub. RTS games, though, are an odd case. The first ever RTS video game was called War of Nerves. Here's 3 seconds of it. We've come a long way, team. First RTS game that sounds even vaguely familiar to the average... Oh god. Alright, let's get the word over with. Gamer. Oh, Jesus Christ. Is Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans, which became a landmark success amongst the PC community at the time in 1994. From there, other companies took notice and attempted to do what competitive companies do best. Ape everyone else under the clutches of the economy, rip the fiber from every last man, and leave nothing but a husk. A cruel, malicious husk, derived of basic principle and common decency, left within their plane simply to feast off the pain inflicted upon the psyche and wallets of their victims. In comes Ensemble Studios. They made Age of Empires. On to another topic. I love mythology. Like, I really love mythology. I'll bet money when you were a mere tot years ago in the 3rd grade, you'd be taught the wondrous world of ancient Greek history, and be in absolute awe at how much of a departure in curriculum it really was. You went from doing god-awful multiplication tables to talking about how to see basic science laws, and suddenly you're talking about old gods and goddesses that made the world go around for entire cultures. Learning about how they built shrines and wrote songs, making these times feel larger than life compared to the rest of history. If anything, those times as a kid felt less like school, and more like the chance to get to listen to a fantasy book read by my teacher about a far-off world not too different from our own, and getting whisked away in my head, and wonder and excitement about what came before. Sadly, 3rd grade spent more time on those damned multiplication tables and writing cursive than they ever really did talking about Dionysus's raging alcohol addiction or Zeus's flights of sexual fantasy. But I digress. I was not simply going to sit by and let school rob me of this world that seemed so unbelievably cool. I had to find a way to bring it to me. When I was young, my dad was a huge supporter of video games, and luckily for me, he had the ability to get us all our own PCs to use when we were still barely able to form coherent sentences. By the time I was 5, I was playing classics like Age of Empires 1 and 2, Civ 2, Battlefield 1942, a lot of fucking 2s, oh my god, Counter-Strike, and a few months before I turned 6, I began to play World of Warcraft with my dad. Yeah, my dad's cooler than your dad. No offense. Trust me, I'm getting to the point here. I'm not just stringing you along, I absolutely do promise. After the success of Age of Empires, Electronic Arts wanted to take a different approach to the RTS setting than before. One that had so little exposure in the video game space that it was essentially market gold waiting to be dug up. What they came up with released in October of 2002. I was in 3rd grade in the 2000s, and desperate for a change to my catalog. Desperate for more imaginative landscapes and scenes than basic medieval historical set pieces or World War II modern military shooters. I was tired of simply playing with what my dad was playing. I wanted more of those stories about my class, more about Greece, more about mythological creatures and monsters, more about heroes larger than life. One could say, I was desperate for a new age, an age of mythology. Age of Mythology is a game about history, except it's history that isn't at all factual, but based on factual fantasy that's not actually factual. Duh. Most ancient mythological stories contain a few common traits. There's always a hero, there's always a monstrous villain, and it's always sick as hell.
An excerpt from the Odyssey. Odysseus encountered him on his return from Troy and became trapped in the giant's cave. To escape, the hero plied him with wine and as he slept plunged a burning stake into his thigh. Then Odysseus proceeded to lie to the recently mutilated creature and tell him it was nobody who hurt him. Truly out of this world intelligent. Big W's.
For a game based on the stories that are still mimicked and referenced worldwide even to this day, you'd assume that a campaign simply based on those stories and retelling them would be the correct and safe bet from a business standpoint. You would be somewhat right. You see, remember that little game called Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans I talked about less than maybe 3 minutes ago at the absolute most, that every RTS was against in the market in the early 2000s? Well, their campaigns are based on high fantasy, in a world where you could really invest yourself, something that retellings of true to semi-true stories don't really allow the same level of. And as Warcraft continued to gain traction and steam in the early 2000s, I would be shocked if the conversation never came up that they would have to change the campaign formula, and fast, in order to gain a stronger position against Warcraft 3, which, by the way, they were releasing alongside in the same year. So they changed the formula.
You may feel less like fighting after I pull off your head.
Whereas the old age of games housed accounts of famous people like Attila the Hun and Joan of Arc, and faithfully exhibited them to a decent degree in game form, Age of Mythology just did a line and basically did an ancient world equivalent to the greatest hits album with recurring characters and jerry-rigged a story around that. There are well-imagined characters woven from the larger-than-life context of mythology, and their writing is actually good in very many ways, each with their own distinctive traits, expressed faithfully through the entire campaign. Overall, I think the characters are excellent. Throughout the runtime of the campaign, there is always one cutscene before and directly after each major level filled with moments for you to get invested in. In terms of how they are presented, for a game released in 2002, it looks breathtaking. The character acting in particular is leaps and bounds above its competition in many ways, especially in terms of the model's movements during certain scenes. The characters are all part of a group that you form throughout your adventures through Greece, Egypt, the Nordic regions, and Atlantis respectively, and all of them have exceptional voice acting and well-defined arcs. I won't provide a full-blown synopsis, but the very basic premise of the story is, our main character, Arkantos, needs to help keep his home safe. To do so, he kills pirates and goes to Troy. There, he meets old and new friends, and is whisked away into a conflict between humanity and a cyclops named
Gargarensis.
From then on, you go through the different regions with your crew, stopping
Gargarensis
from opening these big, ominous, totally not evil gates in the 4 respective regions. Hijinks then ensue, and eventually you get back to Atlantis, where the final gate is. Shit goes down, and our hero dies in the process of preventing the gate from opening. Overall, a nice story, and it mimics the epics of old. A real standout level though is the Dream level. Absolute banger. The voice acting is consistently great with many memorable lines that were engraved in my brain all those years ago. Here's some examples.
You go first, Chiron. If you fall screaming to your death, we'll just stay here.
We're lost.
Do you see now? Nothing happens. Your god is dead. Then he's gonna have a really bad day. You may feel less like fighting after I pull off your head.
The levels themselves hold up for the most part, as slowly more and more challenging scenarios that make you utilize the tools given to you for a few hours. My only real gripe with the game is actually it's really easy. The whole game is really easy. All you really need to do is build a few surplus units and just kind of brute force every single mission. There isn't much room when it comes to interactiveness in levels either, as most levels are beginning to end extremely linear with no outward level-to-level progression. There are also other campaigns within the game that take place during or after the main campaign ends. These are all inherently worse than the base campaign overall, and they're a lot shorter. They have less time to breathe. They all come off as supplementary rather than complete packages, but for what they are, they're still pretty okay, and they fulfill the need for campaigns after you finish the main one anyway. When it comes to overall quality though, I feel the campaign outshines the old games easily. Warcraft 3 had arguably one of the best RTS campaigns ever made and set the example for the foreseeable future. It succeeded in this effort by making characters that were relatable but pulpy in a wonderfully imagined world, already being aided by 2 other games' history and context. It's not really that much of a wonder the game was good, as the framework was confident and sturdy. Not to mention the game was fun and the style was teeming with creativity. Even compared to its competition, it's really good. Downside is, we all know which game ended up being the breadwinner in terms of holding power. Spoiler alert, it wasn't this one, which is a damn shame. Maybe someday we'll get a sequel, and maybe someday this game will actually get the attention it deserved.
We're lost.
Age of Mythology's scenario tool is functional, user-friendly, and clean for the most part. Everything is there to make a custom campaign or unique custom game modes. The tool's good, and even as a kid I was able to interact with it and make some decent little levels of my own once I got fed up replaying the campaign constantly. It's just that in terms of content to glean from others in this tool, you won't find much. Scenario tools have created some of the best genres in the industry, single-handedly being the platform that created Dota and further expanded on the tower defense games, or in some unique cases, roguelikes get a lot of inspiration from old scenario tools. For that, the tool deserves a mention, but overall I think it's a lackluster tool compared to its former competition.
You go first, Chiron. If you fall screaming to your death, we'll just stay here.
As per the norm when it comes to RTS games, you have many options as to what kind of civ you want to play. Usually it's as simple as a palette swap or a couple of unique techs and passives, and they call it a day. Age of Mythology is that, except take the concept of homogenization and trample it with an 18-wheeler. There are 5 major civ types you can play, each with 3 major gods that each have their own passives and unique base god power. The only things that these major god civs have in common is basic units and resource generation. Outside of that, the way in which each god plays and functions varies wildly from civ to civ, even sometimes within the same pantheon. For a quick example, when you play the Norse, you can pick Thor, who can make a special armory early along, and has the ability to have a lot of weird, wacky villager combinations thanks to the dwarves having similar stats and gathering to other units which the other gods don't have. Compare that to Loki, who's another god you can pick in the Nordic faction, whose main gimmick is using a flood of myth units. You can create them from randomly attacking with Hersers, and from tech from Hell in the last age of the game. Fundamentally, their base units are the same and perform the same basic actions, but the way in which you approach those units shifts completely from god to god, which is a far cry from most matchups in old age of games, where unless you were a competitive player in esports at the time, which by the way barely existed, the major differences between civs are 1 unit and 2 techs and basic numerical passives that overall have extremely minor interactions with the overall game. The interactivity is what gives this game its spice, and dear God does it make it spicy. Personally, I'm a huge Atlantean and Greek apologist who loves Oranos and Zeus respectively. Map selection is decent overall, and tile sets are interesting and unique depending on map size and player count between matches. Personally, I'm a huge fan of 12-player matches as the maps can become basically unreadable at a glance, and it's just utter chaos. Personal favorites of mine are probably Nomad, Ghost Lake, Acropolis, and Midgard. People that are evil and hate interacting with other people and want to kick puppies, like this map. Rethink your life decisions. One aspect I've severely neglected to explain is the actual gameplay, so let's just get over that real quick. Basically, you start out with a town center and a few villagers. You get resources from surrounding areas and build up your base. Then you can advance through ages to gain access to new tech units and powers. You can do this 4 times. You start in the Archaic Age, you can advance to the Classical, Heroic, Mythic, and then finally, the Titan Age. Each advancement is a hefty investment. It's meant to give you a set of major power spikes. This changes everything depending on civ and god. Each time you upgrade in ages, you choose a specific god to worship. The god chosen then grants you specialized tech, units, and a unique god power. God powers can do a large variety of things, and almost all of which are hilariously bad or unbelievably broken. The main end goal of the game is to win through a variety of means. Either you kill your opponents, or you build a wonder. This option is also known as being bitch-made. Rinse and repeat and you got a satisfying loop that never ceases to entertain. My only major gripe is certain civs are just way better, as their gimmick gives them more of an edge no matter the use case, and certain maps are so unbelievably bad in terms of gimmick or design, it muddles everything. The experience is more of a fun game than a fair game, which is fine, but definitely something that impedes the demographic of players this game probably needs to retain, considering what happened to them by the end of the decade. Rest in peace, you beautiful, beautiful soldier boy. Thank you, Ensemble, for really trying to go all out with the setting and stories. They meant a lot.
The entire city is lost.
I hope you enjoyed this essay as much as I enjoyed writing it. Age of Mythology is a great game. Pretty based, very pog-pilled. 10 out of 10 would recommend. As always, it's been a pleasure divulging my opinions onto you. Hope to metaphorically see you next year and literally see you later tonight. I'm in your walls, I'm in your walls, I'm in your walls, I'm in your walls. See you soon.